Hola everyone, my name is Gerardo Gauthier-Zayas, your host to Conversation Café. I prefer to use pronouns he, him, his, and my social identities are Puerto Rican, gay, cisgender male, and first generation college student, and a doctoral candidate at New England College in Henniker, New Hampshire. I have spent over 20 years of my career creating programs and leading individuals, organizations in healthcare, higher education, nonprofit, and government industries, offering client and student-centered services towards individuals and families of socially economically challenged zip codes, as well as ethnically and racially underrepresented populations. I teach as an adjunct faculty at community colleges and four-year institutions, primarily in the New England area, and have been in executive level leader roles in higher education, in the workforce development, and academic affair areas. Today, I am also the founder of Avant Consulting and Training LLC, offering leadership, coaching, business strategies, creating and facilitating professional development offerings, utilizing diversity, equity, inclusion frameworks. The intent of Conversation Cafe is to create awareness, engagement, knowledge, and lessons learned based on guests' lived experience. Conversation Cafe aims to connect topics of diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice frameworks, and to create how one might approach deeper conversations that are sometimes messy or just difficult to have with yourself, family, and coworkers alike. I hope Conversation Cafe episodes offers our listeners out there the opportunity to reflect on its content and tone between guests and I. After all, we often hear it's not what people say that calls our attention, it's how it's said that leaves the lasting impression. We will engage in honest conversations in hopes to help create a snowball effect for others to have intentional conversations about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice, systemic strategies, and sustainabilities across multiple industries. Conversations about diversity, equity, and social justice can be uncomfortable for many, and yet in the midst of this discomfort, being silent or not trying to understand how not having them impacts a large portion of our brothers and sisters truly does more harm than good for society at large. Conversation Cafe is not pushing an agenda. It's about planting knowledge, insight, and dangers of assumptions made when not informed of its true intent. It's not a hand out, it's a hand up. The work itself starts with understanding the point of views being made, respecting them even if we don't agree. Today on Conversation Cafe, we are discussing microaggressions. Our guest is Dr. Felicia D. Griffin-Fennel. She's the director of the Academy Fellows Program and the lecturer of sociology within the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. AFP aims to provide minoritized students, namely Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, BIPOC, first-generation college attending and low income, within SBS, with academic scaffolding and educational wealth with the goal of retention, graduation, and transition to graduate school and or employment. Formerly, she was employed at Springfield Technical Community College as the director of the STEM Center. Activity Director for the U.S. Department of Education HSI STEM Title III Part F grant, and Founder Director of the STEM Starter Academy. Those efforts aim to increase the number of students who pursue and complete associate's degree in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, with specific emphasis placed on underrepresented populations, including African American and Latinx students and female students. A triple graduate of University of Connecticut, she earned a Bachelor of Science degree, a Master's degree, and a doctorate degree in psychology, as well as a graduate certificate in women's studies. She has been an administrator and faculty member at Post University, Waterbury, Connecticut, and has taught as an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut and Central Connecticut State University. She is an alumna of Hers Institute, a member of the Sisters of the Academy, and was a participant in the Scala Summer Teaching Institute. She has delivered approximately 30 presentations at conferences and a number of invited talks at universities, and co-authored scholarly publications in journals and edited books, including the Journal of Black Psychology, Cultural Health and Sexuality, and the Sage Encyclopedia of Psychology and Gender.
Today's topic, we're going to discuss microaggression. We're going to unpack microaggressions. And as far as for us to have a framework on, we hear the word, we have examples, but I wanted to kind of start at the very beginning with regards to the definition of what we're going to be using in order to have this conversation. So according to the Harvard Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging, they have this excellent resource. It's free for the public. It was published in October 2020. I am not affiliated. I am not getting paid. I just really like the tool and the way they break down a lot of the terminology. So the terminology that I'm using today is based on their resource. And according to this particular resource guide, it says microaggressions, a comment or action that unconsciously or intentionally expresses or reveals a prejudiced attitude toward a member of a marginalized group, such as a racial minority. It continues to say, these small common occurrences include insults, slights, stereotyping, undermining, devaluing, delegitimizing, overlooking, or excluding someone. Over time, microaggressions can isolate and alienate those who receive on the receiving end and affect their health and well-being. So that's what we're working with today. And today I'm excited to introduce to the audience. Today's guest is Dr. Felicia D. Griffin-Fennel. She is the director of the Academy of Fellows Program and a lecturer of sociology within the College of Social and Behavioral Health Sciences at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. So, Dr. Griffin-Fennel, thank you and welcome to Conversation Café. I would love to give this opportunity to kind of, who are you? I mean, yes, I just said what you do, but who are you? Why don't you give the audience a little bit of who you are?
Hi, Gerardo. How you doing? I am really happy to be with you today. Just a little bit of my background. So I was born in the South. I'm from Alabama. I've been here in the Northeast for most of my life, but I'm always going to be first and foremost a child of the South. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have been in academia all of my life, and I don't think I'm ever going to leave.
Thank you. Thank you for being academic, because it's without a doubt a calling, right? But please go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Most of my work has centered around the experiences of minoritized individuals. It's particularly looking at their experiences within academia, both for those people who are currently pursuing degrees, undergrad degrees and graduate school degrees, but also looking at the experiences of those who work in academia, either from staff administrative positions or from faculty roles, and how their experience as minoritized individuals influence how they engage in those spaces.
So for me, it's really interesting as educators, as individuals of underrepresented populations, especially in higher education. It always speaks to me a certain kind of way, particularly with this topic of microaggressions. I think there are some people who are unaware, and there are some people who are aware and kind of think it's not a priority. It's the whole dominant and subordinate culture that kind of kicks in, and what are the norms between those two? So I think it's an interesting bridge, because this is, to the definition, speaks to awareness, right? At least in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of that awareness is the awareness of the person receiving the microaggressions, and of course, awareness of the person giving it, and then the three types of microaggressions that exists out there. Mm-hmm. So with this being said, can you share with the audience, let's talk about an introduction or examples of microaggressions, and what does that mean to you as a diverse professional with the credentials to back you up and the experience that you have? Can we unpack that a little bit, and let's talk about that introduction, that aha moment, as I call it, even though it might have not felt great. Mm-hmm. Or can we unpack that together?
Sure. I think for any minoritized individual, as they think back on their existences, their lived experiences, they'll come to the realization that microaggressions have always been there. Just like with anyone who is learning a particular subject, they learn how these things have been impacting who they are and how they've colored who they are for their entire lived existence.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, when I was first introduced to this term of microaggressions, it was during my time of graduate school. I started learning of this concept, reading about Sue and his work at Columbia, and how it almost became this crystallizing moment for me that I've had these things happen to me all of my life, but didn't have the language to describe what was going on. For instance, I think a common comment that students of color often receive, especially if they're students who've performed well academically, is the old adage of, "Oh, you speak so eloquently. Oh, you're so smart."
Right.
And on one level, you initially take that as, well, yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that.
Right.
But then after a while, when you constantly hear these comments, but then you also see how people see other people who look like you,
Yes.
and how they categorize those individuals, and they've taken this time to pull you outside of that and saying, "Oh, you're not like them. You're different from them." It becomes difficult for you to take in. One really nice way, it's actually not nice, but one really astute way of describing the microaggression experience over a person's life is the idea of a paper cut, right?
Ooh, okay. Please, I'm listening.
So with a paper cut, they are small, they happen quickly, but that pain lingers. That pain lingers in a way like other pains don't. And the next paper cut that happens, the same kind of experience. And then think about it, over the course of the day, you could be exposed to a whole mess of paper cuts, and you have that building pain.
Right.
That's the experience of having microaggressions piled on you. It becomes this insidious kind of experience. It's unable for you to avoid. They constantly happen because you're constantly engaging with different things in your life that's going to cause you that slight. The same as a paper cut. You're always going to find a way to engage with paper.
Right.
And it's going to give you that awful, painful, insidious, lengthy pain.
Right. That's pretty powerful. I mean, in the basic concept, right? If somebody can't get that, I mean, who hasn't received a paper cut? I mean, who can't? And the interesting thing about it for me is that, you know, you have no choice but to continuously pick up that paper. Right. So then it becomes a question of, is that person receiving it ready to be resilient and push through it, call it out? Let's talk about that a little bit. And then the other piece is where we are today, as far as, you know, microaggressions happen often, too often, for some more than others, but it happens nevertheless. When I'm teaching and we're talking about this particular topic, students who want to do something, it's the first question, like, so how do I go about it without feeling, and I'm talking about on both sides, the receiving person and the person who's unaware or who might be aware, who kind of wants to become more aware to avoid that. I think that it's really interesting to hear these questions, and then the follow-up kind of comments are, I don't want to be a troublemaker. So then there's that, right? It's like, okay, let's address it, because it's not what you're saying, it's how I'm receiving it. And how do we kind of say, us BIPOC community members say, I'm going to address it and be okay with it, because not everybody has the confidence to do so.
Speaking about those two pieces that you described, both the position of the minoritized individual who is the receiver of the microaggression, as well as the person who is of dominant culture, who is often the individual who is giving that microaggression. Both groups want to make change. because that's the only way we're going to be able to deal with this by addressing the elephant in the room.
Right, right.
I'll start by talking about the individual who is the aggressor in this situation, the white individual. One thing that I would advise anyone who is white, who is on this journey, please don't place on the shoulders of those folks of color who are in your circle to be your educators. The lived experience of a person of color is difficult as it is. And to have to be the one who leads that person down the road to be able to talk about how this is impacting them, why this is impacting them, how this has an impact on your physiological well-being as well as your psychological well-being, that creates an additional tax on that person of color who is in that friend group of yours. Yes. So if an individual is truly interested in understanding further about how microaggressions play and how they impact minoritized individuals, go out and read literature.
Right.
Go seek the references that Sue and Kevin Nadal have written over the years. Kevin Nadal is a fantastic resource that he is a student of Sue. Yes. Go and read some of their work. Yes. And see how microaggressions have evolved since the 70s and people in terms of people's understanding of what they are. Mm-hmm. And being able to talk about how people have been impacted by them and what costs there have been for individuals when they are in environments where they have been microaggressed against. For individuals who are minoritized and who deal with this on a daily basis, part of that work is being able to separate yourself out from that microaggression. As I said before, with the idea of this paper cut, you're living in this experience. You can't escape it. You can't run away from your everyday experience. You have to deal with it. And if you aren't aware of what's going on, that's going to have ramifications on your physiological health. There's going to be increase in stress. Your cortisol levels are going to rise because you're going to be constantly fearing what's going to happen when I walk into this next scenario. It's going to have an impact on your psychological well-being. It may trigger even imposter syndrome for you.
Absolutely, especially when you're one of few in a room. Mm-hmm. In a room or in positions of power or position.
Exactly.
Singularly, right? Because sometimes that doesn't happen as well as we hope, but we're working on it as a society, but still has some work to be done.
Most definitely. And once those things set in, they're going to have an impact negatively on your school performance. If you're in school, they're going to have an impact on your work performance because you're going to constantly second guess everything you're doing and wonder about the legitimacy of your presence there. Especially if you've heard comments from people to question your education. Why are you here? How did you get here? You got that job? How did you get this job? Unfortunately, it would create a situation of, you can almost call it gaslighting.
Oh, absolutely. 100%, 150% agree with that. That is so true.
For a person who is in that minoritized role, the way that you work to pull yourself out of that is to be able to recognize what's happening to you when those moments happen and have enough confidence in yourself and in your abilities to be able to pull yourselves out. I can speak from experience. I've had these situations happen to me, and it's almost devastating about the effects that it can cause. But when you sit down and you think about your reality, your lived experience, who you are, and recognize that this imaginary existence that you've been placed in because of those microaggressions isn't your true reality, you're able to pull yourself out of that. And that helps propel you forward.
It's so true. I think part of it is understanding how do you absorb that? And how do you kind of get rid of it too? You know, you kind of learn, absorb, learn, call it out, and move on. And I believe that environment is everything too. You know what I mean? I think part of it is if the environment doesn't have a systemic approach to calling out microaggressions, it's not the responsibility of the dominant power. It's just, you know, people quote unquote, and I'm gonna use air quotes because people can't see them, but you know, or you're just overreacting.
Yes.
And I'm
Again,
thinking,
invalidating your experience.
Correct. I'm thinking, are you bleeping kidding me? But and it goes back to that too. It's like, how do we create systemic awareness? Because I mean, first and foremost, the awareness, right? And then how do we approach it? And then how do we not just have a checkbox? We're talking about microaggressions today. I'm talking about a true assessment, an audit of the whole diversity, equity, inclusion audit, which includes this microaggression, has to be looked at intentionally.
Most definitely. You have to truly be able to explore the entire gamut of this. You have to look at the blood of the institution, how it engages with its staff, how it engages with its students, how do the students feel about the institution, how do the staff and faculty feel about the institution, and know that there are plans in place in order to tackle those issues of DEIJ across the institution, that we aren't just spending a single session introducing this and then people are walking away from it and not being held accountable to their own contributions.
Amen. Yeah, and I think part of it too, one thing I'm always discussing with individuals is, you know, DEI and SJ, social justice, I'm gonna add that in there too. DEI experience, the organization has to be ready to hear that truth.
Yes.
Right. And equally important, do something about it. I believe that when the organization doesn't do that, it's such a disservice and step backwards for the students. Like, yes, not all, you know, post-secondary institutions have a large part of the populations that are BIPOC students or minoritized students. However, for those that are, especially like among Hispanic serving institutes, you know, HBCUs, minority serving institutions, you lose sight of, like, you know, we talk about, you know, organizations have this great thing about their mission, but those are words, right?
Yes.
And I think, like, how do you create systemic approaches? I mean, microaggression is so tangible. And then what you often hear, at least what I often have heard, is there's not much we can do about it because it's not really against policy. Well, then the question becomes is who's looking and writing at these policies and who's implementing them? So I always find it a little bit insulting. I'm saying that really nicely, even though I wanted to say much more colorful descriptions of how I feel. It's really insulting because of the fact that what you're saying is, it's almost like when we talk about pedagogies, right? And when you work with students and the pedagogy is not culturally responsive, and you're, say, an HSI, you're being irresponsible to your students as an organization. Never mind, you know, I understand there's always politics, and this is what always kind of baffles me. I'm like, how can we depoliticize something as simple as equity, right? Microaggressions is definitely an act against equity. You know, we're as educators, we're responsible as organizations to say, well, let's close these disparity educational outcome rates among students, right, among students that are minoritized. And yet, when you ask, show me the policy or show me how much money you're spending on this effort, not just we'll put a committee together and a whole year the committee's together, and then all of a sudden there's nothing as far as a tangible outcome. Not a study. I'm not talking about a study. I'm talking about a true audit of this is what it is and where does microaggression fit in there, not just defining it, but holding people accountable to it as well, in my opinion.
When students voice those kinds of things and call the institution to the fire, that's when change can truly happen. But if there is an institution where students don't feel empowered for whatever reason to voice what's going on or what they experience, or have unfortunately not been exposed.
Amen to that. I think that part of it too is the power dynamic, which you're talking about too.
Exactly.
Right? How do we expect people to kind of say, well, culture responsive pedagogies are not something that could you or can you share with the audience? Why is this important to you and a person with your stature, as a person with your experience, as a person that, as a professional of color?
This matters for various reasons to me. Being a kid growing up in the South, it was important, and I didn't know why at the time, but it was important to be able to see folks who looked like me in the classroom and to be able to provide me with an education. It's been important for me throughout my studies to see other students of color doing this work, pushing themselves through the pipeline and continue moving forward. Our histories have importance. They need to be expressed and they need to be digested.
Yes.
The arguments that you're talking about with regard to critical race theory, they're frightening to me. The histories of minoritized individuals have been so downplayed for so long.
Right.
I remember in middle school or high school, the most I got about Black history for one of my classes was a packet that was given to the Black students in the class.
Right.
The white students didn't get the same packet. And this
Wow.
was all the Black history that we got for the entire year.
Wow, that's some craziness. I mean,
Yeah,
I even think about even today, right? I mean, I think part of it when I speak with groups, whether it's in a classroom or professional setting, I think part of it is one person had asked me one time during a panel that I was on. Didn't ask me, but asked the panel. They said, so how do we go about this, right? And this is a person in K through 12, which is a whole different arena onto itself. And one of the things that I had made comment on, the importance of acknowledging and celebrating the diversity of our populations, all our populations, right? And don't let it happen only in February.
Yeah, that's when we got that
Black History
packet.
Month. Right? Look at that. And I didn't even know. That's my point, right? It's like you have to be able to be a little bit more intentional.
Exactly.
And yeah, the other part of that question was, how do we, get, buy-in? And I was just like, well, as every district is different, I understand that, a whole bunch of rules, and I understand that as well. I think part of it too is I had suggested, so well, even if you kind of come up with a list of 10 books and you say, okay, class, during this year, we're going to have to pick, I don't know, 3. I'm just throwing out a number out there. And by consensus, let them have some kind of buy-in. And they might push back. They may or may not push back. But the fact of the matter is that you're saying, okay, it's important. It's important that your involvement happens so that they can hear these diverse perspectives of all topics, not just history. But history is a big one right now.
Making sure that the narrative is being introduced throughout the curriculum. That's one thing that I'm proud of. The school district in which I live, they wholeheartedly bring in diverse perspectives. And in fact, my state, Connecticut, is the first in the union for K through 12 to mandate that Brown and Black education be incorporated in through its K through 12 system.
Go ahead, Connecticut.
It's empowering because
it
allows our children to see themselves in the narrative. For me, for being a trained psychologist, psychology only became alive to me as a discipline when I learned about Claude Steele in Stereotype Threat.
Wow.
Because for me, it was like, yo, oh my gosh, this Black dude did this? For real?
Yes. Well, there's that unspoken connection. Yes. Yes, yes, and yes. I kind of feel that way as well. It's like when you see or read something, it's empowering to the underrepresented populations,
Mhm.
but it's also creating awareness. And I think that a lot of organizations might not see and I'm using my business terms here, the return on investment, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I get it as a business, as an MBA. I understand the importance of running a business and making sure the legacy, especially in higher education with all its challenges it's facing right now. I don't see how higher education will thrive unless it really talks about diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice in a more systemic way, as opposed
It
to a training
it needs
way
to.
or a one-off, right? Like
Mhm.
this teacher and that teacher, or that professor and that professor. But why is it that every professor in this particular department might need to do something? I know this is just me throwing stuff out in the air.
No, I think you're on something with that. Institutions from the top down infused into the entire institution needs to bring forth the importance of and have buy-in across the institution about the importance of the experience of minoritized individuals and making sure that the curriculum is addressing and bringing forth to the students these diverse histories. In sociology classes, making sure that they're talking about aspects of race and gender in those classes, regardless of the subdiscipline within sociology. Making sure that in biology classes, yes, we're talking about specific theory as it relates to, say, animal anatomy, but maybe want to give credit every so often to those specific researchers and show those students who those researchers were.
Yes.
Because a lot of the students would be surprised to hear that some of those folks were Black and brown individuals.
Yes. Agreed.
So being able to ensure that we take a step to be able to highlight the contributions of everyone in this narrative allows all of our students to see themselves moving forward and staying in that pipeline so that they themselves can be the inspiration for those future students.
Yes. And to add to that, I kind of feel like when we don't do that, that gives the slap or the paper cut that much deeper that you referred to earlier with the microaggressions too.
Yes.
Right? It's even worse. Paper cuts, I mean, there's tiny one onto itself, but painful.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking that further exacerbates the whole piece of how do we become aware? Like aware that this is what's going on, and how do we feel comfortable enough to address it, not from a one-on-one, even though that's important, obviously, but from a systemic perspective.
Yeah.
Right? How does an organization say this is what it is, and here are examples, and if you do this, these are violations of something, as opposed to, oh, we can't. I just don't understand that in my own head. So I just want to kind of throw that out there.
No, I think institutions have to be really intentional about how they are exploring this work with their employees, more than just a single one-off situations. Having opportunities for people to practice these things. So for instance, having workshops on microaggressions where they get to hear what some of these things sound like, or see physically what some of these things might be like, and then put themselves in the shoes of a minoritized individual.
Right.
And let them see, oh snap, that's what that's like, or that's how that feels. Because often if the situation is that of a one-on-one setting where a white individual microaggresses against, say, a Black woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she's empowered enough to say, hold on, do you realize what you just said to me?
Yes.
Depending on the dynamic between those two individuals,
Yep.
It can go, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize what I said. Let's scrap that, start over.
Yes.
Or it can come, you're being sensitive. I didn't mean anything by that. I don't know where you're coming from.
Correct.
Thus,
And then
invalidating the individual.
right. And then the person that commits it kind of comes across as a little aggressive.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But if the response from the Black woman was passionate, it would be she's angry.
Yes, she's the angry Black woman.
She's the angry Black woman. And I've always found that interesting with the double standard of a reaction from a Black or brown person. That acceptance of being passionate is very different than it is for others. Well, the dominant culture more so. So yeah, I agree with that with a white individual.
So that's why if there were opportunities for actual workshops where people get to practice this work.
Yes.
And this is where the power of the co-conspirator come in, because you can have your ally, but for me, it's even stronger to have that co-conspirator. That's the individual who allows themselves to be vulnerable, who allows themselves to be placed on the chopping block if something goes down, if something goes awry. Right. So being able to have workshops that are led by those co-conspirators who are able to talk about how these situations are problematic. It removes that piece of this minoritized person needing to be the one to educate and to point out and to talk about why this is problematic.
Correct. No, that's brilliant, and it's so true at its purest form. And I think people have to be open to that. I think that this topic has always interested me because obviously, I've experienced it very different than I'm sure than you have. But the commonality there is, as a person who is from an underrepresented population, although my skin may say I'm not, my culture and my ethnicity says I am. And that can play out very differently, based on how one speaks. And, for me, it's different. You walk into a room, I may be easily assimilated to the group, so to speak.
Yes.
Until something's not right. And then if it's called upon, then it becomes a thing bigger than what it needs to be. And I think microaggressions are really something that can become bigger if it's not addressed. And I think the systemic approach has to really start, to your point, yes, identifying it, but also have that space to practice it where individuals can actually feel confident and comfortable to say, you know what, I'm owning my stuff, to say it nicely, and I'm going to be aware and conscious of it. Because I'm a glass half full kind of person. I know there are some people who genuinely genuinely do it without knowing.
Yes.
But there's a lot of people that do it, and when you call it, it doesn't matter. And I'm thinking, let's focus on those individuals who want to do better for themselves, and understanding the return on investment, what it does to a community, a workplace community, a home community, in a community where you live in as well. So I think that that's really important.
Amazing. I was just going to say, the more individuals that you can get on the side of understanding,
correct,
the more allies and co-conspirators that you have against that group that you're always going to have that struggle with. But at least there's more voices in the choir.
Yes. And we can harmonize all we want, but we need people, without a doubt. So question for you, is there anything else pertaining to today's topic of microaggressions that you want to share with the audience? And then what I'd like to do is do some just close up steps. So is there anything else you want to share before we move into that?
I would say for anyone who is dealing with them, always take an accounting of who you are and who your true self is. You'd be surprised how much that understanding of self and your own self-worth serves as armor against those kinds of situations. They help you bounce back from that injury that they cause much quicker. So you have to have a good understanding of who you are and what you bring to the table and how capable you are. Because once you've been in a situation where you have repeatedly been undermined by those microaggressions, it becomes really difficult to bring yourself out.
Thank you for those incredible words of wisdom. And I hope that audience members are able to take that as a carrot, right? A takeaway that kind of really sit with them. And I think sometimes people don't understand what they need until the situation arises. So I want to say thank you so
Definitely.
much for that particular carrot. Dr. Griffin-Fennel, we are coming towards the end of our podcast, a little episode here. I'd like to offer you the opportunity that if you want to provide the audience with some information, like how they might want to reach you or platforms about, the work that you're doing over at UMass, which is amazing. How do people get a hold of you on that aspect, if you don't mind sharing?
I would say, folks, if we don't reach out to me, check out our UMass website and look up our academic fellows program under the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. We're doing some really great work with a significant population within our college. Our college is comprised of around 5,000 students, and AFP looks to work with about 40% of those students who identify as low income, first generation college attending, and who identify as BIPOC. So we strive to provide an opportunity for students to persist and persist strongly at UMass through opportunities where they can engage communally, academically, provided with resources and connections with various stakeholders on and off campus. So the best way to reach out to me is look me up at UMass.
Awesome. Again, thank you so much, Dr. Griffin-Fennel. And for the audience out there, I just wanted to say, please be on the lookout. Soon we will be having I'll be offering a Conversation Café Facebook page and Instagram account so that we can actually have these conversations ongoing. I think that's part of the piece too. When we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's not just a one-off conversation and I'm the best and I know what I'm doing. It truly is an ongoing conversation that could lead to action. And I always explain to people, if you could be part of that community, then you are aiming towards closing those inequities that exist today. Also, what I like to do, if listeners out there could take a few minutes, literally maybe 3-4 minutes, I have a listener feedback survey that I would love some feedback on to understand how you feel, what the information that we talked about today of this particular podcast. If you could give it a rating, it's like a Likert scale kind of thing. And then I ask individuals like, what is DEI? What's the priority for your organization? And then what other topics in the realm of diversity, equity, inclusion might a listener be interested in hearing about? So I would love for individuals, this obviously is available on my YouTube channel and soon to come across other platforms. So if individuals are interested in, please follow us on the YouTube channel of Conversation Café. And I look forward to getting your feedback and seeing you and listening to the guests during our next episode. Thank you so much, everyone. Adios, wepa, as I say in my wonderful language. And everybody, please stay safe and take care. Thank you so much. Again, Dr. Griffin-Fennel. Adios.
Adios, amigo.